Good morning and welcome to our daily devotional for Thursday, May 21st, 2020. This is our 6th episode of Lessons from Baseball Cards. And who knows, maybe the baseball season will actually begin sometime soon, at which point we will put an end to talking about players from the past. But today we're talking about the 1987 Topps Greg Maddux rookie card. 1987 Topps Greg Maddux rookie card, which means we're doing something today that I haven't done in the past few lessons, which is talking about a pitcher rather than a position player. Greg Maddux, the professor, certainly one of the greatest pitchers to ever play baseball, but known as the professor because he was also likely one of the smartest pitchers to ever play baseball. Well, let me tell you a little bit about Greg Maddux growing up or his development. He's not the typical power pitcher, but I believe he still should be considered as a power pitcher. He didn't have a very large stature to his body like some pitchers, but generally when we think about a power pitcher, we're thinking about the pitchers who can throw it 100 miles per hour and rack up a lot of strikeouts. You're thinking of pitchers like Nolan Ryan and Randy Johnson, Roger Clemens. Greg Maddux wasn't that type of a pitcher, but he was still a power pitcher. And in fact, if you look at the list of all-time strikeout leaders, he's number 10 on that list, actually finishing his career with over 3,000 strikeouts and under 1,000 walks. So definitely one that can be considered a power pitcher, just for some different reasons. You see, rather than throwing and hitting 100 miles per hour, it's generally agreed upon that Greg Maddux' fastball would hit about 93 miles per hour, and that by the end of his career, he was probably only throwing in the mid-80s. So how is it that he was able to do that? Well, he did it with great control. He had success because he had extremely good location and movement to his pitches. You see, growing up, Greg and his brother Mike, who was also a Major League Baseball player and pitcher, both of them were taught that movement and location were more important than velocity. And I think maybe there's some truth to that, because it's one thing to be able to throw a ball 100 miles per hour, but if you can't do it for a strike, then it's useless. And it's one thing if you have no movement on that 100-mile-an-hour fastball, eventually hitters are going to catch up with that. And in that case, rather than talking about the velocity of the fastball, we'll be talking about the velocity of the exit velocity of that ball as it leaves the ballpark. So he was a different type of pitcher. He did it with control, with good location and good movement. As it turns out, both Greg and his older brother Mike both get drafted into Major League Baseball. Mike was first in 1982, getting drafted to the Phillies. And then 2 years later, in 1984, Greg gets drafted in the second round to the Chicago Cubs. Fast forward a couple of years, 1986, it's around about September, those end-of-the-year call-ups, both of them are making their first appearances in Major League Baseball, and they actually get to start in a game against one another, with Greg, of course, coming out with the victory with the Cubs. And Greg Maddux had a really great career. In fact, he had about a 23-year career in which he was able to play for 4 different teams, had a couple of stints with 2 of them. But most of his career, he's recognized as a Chicago Cub or as an Atlanta Brave, though he did end up his career playing for the Padres and then shortly for the Dodgers as well. But most of that career, a 10-year stint with the Cubs and an 11-year stint with the Braves, he certainly established himself as one of the dominant pitchers in baseball while playing with the Chicago Cubs. It was there that he won his first Cy Young Award as the best pitcher in the National League. But from there, he goes to the Braves, and most of us probably associate or identify Greg Maddux as an Atlanta Brave. It's there that he wins 3 more Cy Young Awards, establishes himself as a dominant pitcher in baseball, wins a World Series. He's part of that great pitching staff with John Smoltz and Tom Glavine. Possibly you remember the year of McGuire and Sosa chasing the home run record. If you haven't seen it, you might Google and look up the the Nike commercial that he and Tom Glavine made, in which they made the slogan of "Chicks dig the long ball" quite famous that year. But a 23-year career, he was incredibly consistent. In fact, during that stretch, he actually had 17 straight seasons with 15 or more wins as a starting pitcher. So certainly one of the most consistent pitchers that we've ever seen in Major League Baseball. One of the stories that I remember about Greg Maddux was the Beanball Story, and it took place his rookie season. It was July 7th, 1987. Again, it's his rookie season. They're playing this game against the San Diego Padres. Andre Dawson, outfielder for the Cubs, has hit a home run early in the game, but then his next at bat, the Padres pitcher throws an inside fastball and actually hits him in the face with the pitch. And so in baseball world, you kind of have an idea of what's going to happen next when the Cubs go out and take the mound. But before Greg Maddux goes out to the mound, his manager pulls him aside and tells him, "You do not retaliate. You do not hit anybody." But in baseball, of course, sometimes that doing just that provides a level of protection for your teammates. You see, if the other team knows that if they hit your player intentionally and that you're going to come back and hit them intentionally, sometimes that provides a level of protection so that that doesn't happen at all. So anyway, the manager tells him, do not retaliate, do not hit anyone. So of course, as you can guess, his rookie season, he's really not doing very well that season. He's struggling. The last thing he needs is to go against what his manager has said. But what does he do? He goes out to the mound. Benito Santiago steps into the batter's box, and Greg Maddux beans him intentionally, gets tossed out of the game. Shortly thereafter, he actually gets demoted back down to the minor leagues, but not without first winning over all of his teammates. Then there's several stories about Greg Maddux and his skills in observation and study. He was known as a body language reader. He would study his opponents and their body language and almost be able to predict where they're going to hit the ball. And in some cases, he was actually known for showing up early to the ballpark, and he would sit in the dugout and watch the opposing team take batting practice so that he would have an idea where they were going to hit the ball. One of his teammates, John Smoltz, tells a story about how there were several times where they'd be sitting in the dugout and all of a sudden Greg Maddux would begin scooting down the bench. And then he would say, "Oh, the batter's going to hit a foul ball right here in just a second." And sure enough, that's exactly what would happen. But he had scooted out of the way so as not to get hit. There was one occasion, a story that's told of how he's sitting in his own dugout, his teammate is up to bat, and as he's watching, he notices his teammate makes an adjustment to his batting stance. And then Greg Maddux says, "We're probably going to have to call an ambulance for the first base coach." Sure enough, as you can guess, next pitch comes, batter hits it, it's a foul ball line drive, and takes out the first base coach, hitting him in the chest. So there's a lot of stories like that about him and his powers of observation. He was very intelligent. He was a very smart pitcher. On one occasion, Bobby Cox, manager of the Braves, came out to visit him for a visit on the mound and made the suggestion maybe we ought to intentionally walk the batter. But Greg Maddux objected to that suggestion and said, "No, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to throw this pitch, and this pitch, and then on the fourth pitch, he's going to hit a pop fly foul ball out to the third baseman." And again, as you can guess, that's exactly what happened. So he had very powerful skills of observation and study of his opponents. All right, there's a couple of lesson starters that I want to leave with you this morning from the 1987 Topps Greg Maddux rookie card. The first one, of course, as you can guess, is that of control, because Greg Maddux was known for his control in pitching. Certainly there were several things that contributed to his great control. He was amazing at listening to instruction and then implementing it in his pitching. Obviously his diligence in studying others, but even the attention that he gave to his own pitching mechanics so as to repeat the same delivery flawlessly and seamlessly. But self-control is certainly one of those lessons that were taught in Scripture. It's one of the fruits of the Spirit in Galatians chapter 5. But I really appreciate what Paul says about self-control in 1 Corinthians 9, verses 25 through 27. That text says, "Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. So I do not run aimlessly, I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified." I believe that in life, generally, when it comes to our actions and our behaviors, we end up where we plan to end up. Or that is, we don't generally end up somewhere by accident. But I believe that we give special thought and special control to our actions and our behaviors so as to end up and reach the targets and the goals that we've set for our lives. So the lesson here for us is that of self-control, but the challenge for us is to give some thought about our targets. Give some thought about where it is that we want to end up. Where is it that you want to end up in your career or in your behavior towards others? Where is it that you want to end up in eternity? And let's give some thought about that and some thought to the behaviors and the things in our life that we need to control in order to end up reaching those goals. Our second lesson starter this morning is consistency. Control and consistency, they go hand in hand. Notice what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15:58. "Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain." Also in Galatians 6 and verse 9, he said, "And let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap, if we do not give up." Again, control and consistency are two qualities that seem to go hand in hand. Once we figure out where we want to be, and once we figure out the steps that will get us there, once we recognize the things that we need, the obstacles that we need to overcome in order to reach our goals, then that's where consistency comes into play. That's when we look for ways that we can be more consistent in those good aspects of our lives, more consistent in those actions that are going to help us to reach our goals. So our challenge this week, is let's look for ways that we can serve the Lord. Let's look for ways that we can serve one another better this week. But let's not grow weary in doing those things. Let's grow more consistent in the way that we serve one another and in the way that we serve our Lord. So there you have it. This morning, those are two lesson starters from the 1987 Topps Greg Maddux rookie card. Thank you for joining me this morning for this Bible study.